Hi, hello, how are you? Craig Chapman here, and welcome to Brutally Roll Your Own Backend, a short video series on writing your own low-cost backend for a Delphi application. Before we get started here today, I wanted to let you know that I would really appreciate any feedback that you have on this video series. If you have constructive criticism or suggestions of how things might be done better, or even if you just like the series and want to let me know, please consider registering at my blog, chapmanworld.com, and posting a comment. Registration is required, but I don't share your email address, and I've never yet sent an email to registered users. The only time I might is if my site had to be moved or shut down for some reason. So please feel welcome to leave comments, safe in the knowledge that you will not be spammed by me. Thank you. This is part 7, and in today's video we're going to get started on the first of 2 Delphi applications which we're going to be building. The one we'll start with today will be the administrative app, or the roaming app, the app that is carried around on the food truck as it moves around. So that's what we're going to get started on. Let's see how far we get. Before we get started, I want to take a quick look at the directory structure that I've set up for my source code. You don't have to mirror this, but I want to explain it just so that you're not confused when I start saving files in various different places. So on my C drive I have a directory called notifier, and within there I've got Delphi and PHP. Now in PHP is just a backup of what we've been writing for the website, and then Delphi of course is where we're going to build our applications. Now I like to break my projects down into source and output, and inside of output we've got the binary or bin directory and lib directory. Again, you don't have to do this, but I like to separate everything out, so that's why I have that. And then within the source directory, this is where we're going to put the project files, and for each of the project files I have a subdirectory. So the admin app that we're writing today is nfadmin, so I've got a subdirectory for the forms and units which are specific to the nfadmin app, another which is for the forms and units specific to the notifier app, and then a common directory where we can put units which are common to both projects. So now that you understand that directory structure, let's go ahead and get started with RAD Studio. Okay, so first thing we need to do of course is start the project. So I'm going to click on Create New Multi-Device Application, make this a blank application, and there we have a template. So let's go ahead and save this stuff off, save all, and browse to my notifier app, Delphi source, and this is going to be the admin app, so I'm going to go into this directory and save this as form main. So this is the main form of the application, and then I'm going to come back up to the source directory and we'll call this nfadmin and save that out to disk. Okay, so we have a main form here. I'm going to go ahead and name that. So I'm naming that form main, and I'm also going to make a change to the project file. So if I go to the project options and select all configurations, I want to change the output directory. So I'm going to come up one level from the source to the output directory, and then we'll go down into out. This is bin, and then my unit output I'm going to go ahead and change here to lib. Okay, so save that off, and I'm going to do a quick build for the Windows debug profile, and then we'll go and take a look at, my antivirus is actually scanning that app right now, but let's go and take a look at what's being generated. So under out, lib, win32 debug, we have the DCU files. These are left over from a previous build. And then if I go take a look at the bin directory, the executable is right there. And RAD Studio just disappeared from my screen because it's in debug mode and it's set to another screen. So let's bring that across. Okay, so we're all set up and we have a project started. So the next thing I'm going to do is divide this this screen up. So this application is the admin app, which lets us add regions and locations to the system, but it's also the roaming app, which is going to be on the truck. It's the app that's going to send the push notifications and generate loyalty cards or loyalty point codes. So there are two functions here. We've got the roaming and we've got the administration. Now, because the food truck business has more than one truck, not all of them will need the admin portion. They'll all need the roaming portion of the app. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put a tab control on this page. And I'm going to align that to the form, so align client. And I'm going to name that control tab control. Let's just call it tab control main. And then I'm going to add two tabs. So the first of the tabs I'm going to name tab roaming, and we'll set the text on that one to roaming. And then the second tab I'm going to name tab admin, and we'll set the text on that to admin. Now, at some point I'm going to add a password check so that if I try to go into the admin section and I don't know the password, it will lock me out. So this will stop operators of trucks accidentally entering into the administration section. But I'm not going to add that password until quite late in development, because if I do, then I'll have to enter a password every time I'm testing the app, and that's going to become annoying. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that until later, but we're going to start working on the admin section in this video. The other thing that I'm going to leave until a little later is the styling of the app. So unlike VCL applications, when you're styling a multi-device or FMX application, you don't really do this as you're building the form. You just build the form up as a series of controls. Don't really worry about how it looks, and then afterwards you come back and you can apply styling to the forms. Now, I don't plan to get too deep into the styling anyway, but for the time being I'm just going to build this form up, and I'm going to assume that it's running on a tablet sized device, so it's going to be 7 inches, 10 inches, typical tablet size, and I'm not going to worry too much about how this looks on mobile devices, for example. So let's go ahead and get started with the admin panel here. I want to divide this admin section up into regions and locations. So I'm going to start with a group box, which I will place on the left of the screen. So let's align that to the left. Align left and make it a little wider. Now this is going to be for the regions, and so I'll name it group regions, and we'll set the text to regions. So this is going to be a list of the regions that that we can operate in. So then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up. Let's put a list box in here, and the list box will be a display of the regions. So I'm going to actually, before I align that, I'm also going to grab a panel, and I'm going to align the panel to the bottom of this this group box. Align bottom. And the panel is basically just going to hold our buttons for us, but by being aligned to the left, I can now align this list box to client, and it'll fill the remainder of the space. It's also covering our caption. So I'm going to go ahead and start by naming it. Okay, and this is going to be LST regions for list box regions. And then I'm going to alter the margins of this control. The top margin, I think 20 pixels. Oh, that's the bottom. Whoops. 20 pixels gets us our regions header back. And everything else I'm going to set to 5 pixels just so that it's within the regions box. Now, let's do the same with the panel here. I'm going to do the bottom, the left, and the right as 5 pixels. I don't need to do the top because the bottom of the list box is covering that. Now, when this application is running, of course, we've got a lot of boxes rendered around these controls. You know, the styling system means that we can alter the styles of these, so we should be able to remove those boxes and make this all look nice and plain and white and boring. So we'll get onto that a little later, but first let me name that panel. I like to name every control if possible. PNL region buttons. And then I'm going to put a couple of buttons in here. So I'll have 1 and a second. Okay, so the first button I'm going to go ahead and align to the left of this panel. Whoops, that's the right, left, and the second I'll align to the right. Let's name each of these buttons. So I'm going to name this one BTN add region, and then we'll have another button which is BTN remove region, and then I'm going to go ahead and change the text on them. The text shouldn't really matter too much when we build this for mobile, because again, the styling, I could add a plus icon or a minus icon to each of the buttons. But for the moment, while we're testing in Windows, let's go ahead and have add and remove. So there are our buttons and our regions. So we can get started on this by doing a read operation on our CRUD endpoint and fill this list box with information. Before I do that, however, let's go ahead and build a client class for... Let's go ahead and build a client class for our CRUD table. So I'm actually going to do something here which, let's just go ahead and discuss it. So I'm going to be using interfaces to represent the classes. I prefer working with interfaces because of the separation of concern between interface and implementation. However, this does mean that we have a little more red tape to put in. So if you don't like working with interfaces, fine, don't write them, just use the classes. But I'm going to go ahead and put interfaces into my libraries here. So the first thing I'm going to do with this library is I'm going to create a CRUD, let's just call it a CRUD library. And I'm going to say File, Save As, and we'll save this in common. CRUD, and that's saved off. Now I'm then going to create a second new unit, add new unit, and this is going to use CRUD as a namespace, and we'll have client. Now what this unit is for, as you might have guessed, is the CRUD client interface. So we'll have iCRUD client is equal to an interface, and put in a key for it there, and then we'll have function read, and for the moment I'm just going to build the read method which reads everything, and we'll return the results as a JSON object. Okay, which means that I need to use as the system.json library. Okay, so I've now got an interface with a single method that's going to return some JSON from our endpoint, and I'm going to go ahead and save that off. Again, it's a common library because we can use this CRUD setup from the notifier app as well, and it's CRUD.client. Now I need to provide an implementation for this interface, so I'm going to go ahead and create another new Delphi unit, and this one will be CRUD.client.standard. So we'll just say that this is going to be the standard implementation for the CRUD interface. So I'm going to use the CRUD.client library so that I have access to the interface, and because the interface uses JSON, I'm going to use it as well. System.json, and then we'll start creating the class which implements this interface. So tCRUD client will be the class, and it is a tinterfaced object, and it represents the iCRUD client interface. So we'll have a private section. In fact, I'm going to have two of these. So this private section I'm going to put my private members into, and this private section I'm going to put iCRUD clients methods into, and then we'll have a public in which I'll have a constructor, and we'll give it a base URL and an endpoint, which is a string. Okay, and this is going to be reintroduced. Ooh, typing and talking at the same time. Sometimes I make that mistake. Reintroduce Spell it again. D-U-C-E. There we go. It's funny how I make those typos while I'm talking, but they're actually finger memory. Destructor, destroy, override. Okay, so when we create our CRUD client, it's going to be given the base URI and the endpoint name. So I'm going to have method members for those. Base URI is a string. Did I use URI or URL? URL. I'm saying URI, I'm typing URL. Okay. F endpoint is going to be a string. And then if I Control-Shift-C, we can populate these methods. So inherited, create, and then I'm going to say f-base URL equals base URL and f endpoint endpoint. So we've captured that data. And the destructor for the moment will do nothing, just call the inherited. We will change that shortly, but for right now. And then, this should be in common. And this is crud.client.standard. So this is the class that implements the iCRUD interface, which means we need to go grab the methods. At the moment there is only one method, which is our read. Okay, so in the read method, we're going to return a JSON object. Maybe this should be a JSON array. Yeah, I'm going to change this. I'm going to make this a JSON array because we want an array of records to come back, and that's pretty much the only data we need coming back. JSON array. You know, actually, just in case of errors and returning error status, I'm going to change this method up some. So let's return a JSON array and have a Boolean return value. So if this returns true, then the call was successful. False, there was an error of some kind. And if it returns true, then we'll populate this array. Yeah, I think I like that a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and change that everywhere that it matters. CRUD client. Okay, so having set that up, let's go ahead and write this method, or at least get started on it. So we're going to need a REST client. Let's call that our client, TREST client. We're going to need a REST request class. And a response. Now these three classes are in the REST unit, which is, let me see, users, oops. I think it's rest.client is the namespace. That seems to have answered it, so yes. Now I could have put these as members on the class. So every time I call read at this moment, I'm going to have to create one of each of these classes. If I put them up in the private section here, then we could create them in the constructor and keep them created. Now this is just a matter of preference how you want to do this. Typically it's considered good practice to allocate and deallocate everything you need within a single method. So that's what I'm going to do here. But if you want to do that up in your private section, that's just fine too. So I'm going to start by creating each of these classes. Our client, actually let's just go ahead and make this easy. And the first one's asking for a base API URI. Well, that would be our F base URL. The request class, now this asks for an owner. I'm just going to set that nil because we're not placing this down on a form. I don't think that will affect anything. And we'll do the same with this. Now, should I wrap each one inside of a try finally? Well, I'm not really using any of the classes at this point, so I'm just going to put try finally around all three, and then I'm going to dispose of each of them. So I'm going to do, let's do the response first. Our response, our request, dispose of, and our client, dispose of. Now, the last time I used dispose of in one of my videos, I got the question, why dispose of? And the answer is, when you're writing mobile applications, you have the automatic reference counting going on in the background. So because I'm using an interface, the interface is reference counted anyway. But here where I'm instancing classes, each of these classes is going to need to be freed when we're finished working with it. Now, automatic reference counting means that I don't actually have to free them all here. I could just ignore them and they would get freed automatically. However, when I run this application on a desktop, the desktop compilers do not have automatic reference counting. So if I were to leave these without freeing them, then what would happen is we would have a memory leak every time we call the read method. So I'm using dispose of to free these classes. Now, why would I use dispose of and not free? Well, free works on desktop clients, but on the automatic reference counting side of things, free doesn't remove the references. It doesn't deallocate the reference count. So the method dispose of was put in place, and dispose of on a mobile application will deal with the reference counting. On a desktop application, it will just internally call the free method to free this class. So that's why I'm using dispose of here. Okay, so now we have the classes being created and disposed. So what we're going to do is wire them up. So the request has a client property, which we point at our client. Request also has a response property, which will point at our response. I'm going to come up here and set result false because I've added a return type to this function now. So I'm just going to initialize that there. And then we've already put our base URL in, but we've not put in the endpoint. So that would be on request. And it would be the resource property, and we're going to set that equal to our endpoint. Okay. The first thing that we're going to do, of course, is a read operation on our CRUD class, and this would be the get method. So we're going to say our request dot method is t-rest request method dot, it's not finding it, and I think that's because we need rest dot types up in here. Let's try that again. Okay, and then we'll use rm get as our read method, and we're not passing any parameters up to this class, so it's probably superfluous to our requirements, but I'm going to go ahead and call request.params.clear just to make sure there's no sort of garbage data. I'm sure that the REST request class clears it anyway, but I just want to make sure it's clean, so that's initialized. Okay. Now, actually, we do need a parameter because we added the API key stuff in. So let's go ahead and create that. If you don't like the use of with, don't use it, but I'm going to go ahead and use it here because it's convenient. So I'm going to say rest request.params.add item, and I'm working with the item that I've just added using the with operator. And then within there, we're going to say the name of this parameter is API key, and then we need a value. You know what? I'm going to say f API key, and I'm going to say that when we create this class, we also add API key as a parameter. So let's go ahead and add that into the constructor, and we'll add a member for it, f API key string, and then in the constructor f API key API key. Okay, so we now have our API key being passed in. This doesn't seem to like. Let's do a quick build and see if it's upset. REST request, undeclared REST request. Oh, this is our request. Okay, so we now have our method prepared, and so let's go ahead. I'm just going to break this out actually and say prepare method and call method. So in the call we do our request.execute, and that's going to execute the method, and we will get some data back. Now the data that we get back is going to be a JSON object, so we're going to want to parse this to get the JSON array. Now the tJSON object class has a parse JSON. Is it parse JSON value? Yes, parse JSON value, and we're going to say use our response dot content. So that's going to get us the content from the response and parse it as JSON. But then it's going to be an array, so I'm going to put as tJSON array and wrap all of that. And then that's what we're going to put into our A parameter. So that's going to get us our data back. Now at the moment I'm not doing any error checking, so I'm going to say that if we successfully call execute without an exception, set result to true, and that should return an array. So let's go ahead and actually we've got one more thing to do. So up here in the CRUD unit, I don't have anything in here yet, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the CRUD client, and I'm going to alias the iCRUD client interface. So this will be crud.client.iCRUD client. And the reason I'm doing that is I want to include the CRUD unit as a namespace and have it automatically include the CRUD client, and we're also automatically going to put in or rather we're also going to put in a function create CRUD, and we're going to ask for a base URL string and an endpoint string and an API key string, and what we'll return will be an iCRUD client. Now the reason I've done this is kind of a factory function here, which is just going to use users CRUD client standard, and it will return result tcrud client.create base URL endpoint API key. So what we're doing here is we're calling create CRUD when we have the CRUD unit included. We'll call create CRUD, and it will pass back a tcrud client as an iCRUD client interface. So it'll give us the reference, the interface reference to this class. And this class is contained as we just wrote it in the crud.client.standard library. Now what this means is if in the future I decide to replace my CRUD client implementation, I go ahead and create a new unit. Maybe it'll be crud.client.awesome or something, whatever it is. And then to make use of that, I will just replace this users and replace this create statement. The rest of my code doesn't need to change because it's just going to call create CRUD. So one way or another, it's going to call this function and get an implementation. And it's all going to be coded against the iCRUD client interface. And because the interface doesn't need to change, just the implementation, we don't have to make changes to the rest of our code. So that's why I like working with interfaces here. So let's go ahead and I'm going to back up to, let's do it on the form create for now. So on for main on the create event. I'm going to go ahead and use my CRUD library, and then let's create a var CRUD client iCRUD client, and we'll say CRUD client is equal to create CRUD client. Okay, did I call it create CRUD client? I just called it create CRUD. Okay, create CRUD, and I'm going to put in a base URI which will be http notifier.chapmanworld.com, and I'm going to come back and replace these with constants, but just for testing purposes right now. The endpoint is going to be regions, and the API key, I actually need to go and dig that up from our code from the last video. Okay, and here it is. So this is the administrative key. Since we're actually working in the Notifier admin app, this is the key that I'm going to work with. Again, I'll make a constant for this later, but right now we're just going to hard code these values in, and then we're going to say CRUD client dot read, and we need to pass in a JSON array. So I'm going to say tJSON array. Now this hasn't been created. We need the system.json library. I'm going to pass in the array, and what we'll do is we'll say if the client reads correctly, then begin, else begin, and we'll just say show message failed. Technically this shouldn't be possible at this point, but I guess it is if the execute fails for some reason. Okay, so now we're going to do something with the data that we get back. So what we need to do here is we need to loop through each of the records that we get in the JSON array and push those into our list box. So I'm going to start by making sure the array is assigned. If assigned A, just to make sure. In fact, let's do if not assigned. So I'm going to restructure some of this real quick. Let's do if not CRUD client, then show the message failed and exit. The reason I'm changing this is if I'm reading to debug this code later, once I've read if not, then I know that if this system fails, I've exited the method here. I don't have to go searching down to find the else condition further down the code. So it just makes it a little easier to read through and debug. And we're going to do the same thing with the assigned. So if not assigned, show message failed. And again, we'll exit. And obviously this should be a different message saying that the function appeared to succeed but didn't. And then we're going to go ahead and loop through. So if not a.count greater than 0, what am I doing? Not. If count less than equal to 0, then begin, and that should be a dot show message, no records, and exit. So again, each of these fail conditions is just going to exit out of the method, so I don't have to go reading down to find the else. And then we can do for idx, so we need a variable idx. Idx is a uint32 for idx equals 0 to pred, which is count less 1, a.count less 1 to begin. So we're going to loop through each of these records here, and we want to grab an object which is from the array items indexed by idx as tJSON object. So that will give us a JSON object back. So let's go ahead and put o tJSON object, and then the object should have the values that we need in there. So we'll do list regions dot items dot add object. So I'm going to add the actual JSON object here so that we have that for later use, and I'm going to say o dot get value, and we want our str name field from that data, and then we'll pass back that as a value. Now, important note here, dot value will strip any quotes from the str name. So because string name is a string value, calling dot value will give us the actual content of that, rather than if I did as text, for example, I would get the quotes included. Okay, and then add object has a second parameter, which is the object itself, so we're passing a reference to the object into the list box. So that should more or less be the method. We do want to clear list regions, so let's do items.clear, and let's go ahead and test this method. Okay, I did get an error message on here, which you can't see because it switched to a different screen. But it brought me here to this abstract error. Let's run that again and just see what the error message reads. So the error message reads, IP pair common, IP proc is not defined, make sure is in the users clause. Now this is likely a dependency of the REST library, so let's go ahead and put IP pair common in the users clause as it suggests. Okay, now that's going to happen down in our CRUD standard implementation. IP pair common. So let's do a clear all and make sure it builds clean. And that runs this time. Oh, no, we get another. So we get here, no peer with interface GUID has been registered. So what's happening here is when the first error message came up, it said that we needed this IP, where did I put it? We needed this IP pair common, and this is the file in which the IP protocol for the REST client gets registered, but we're not actually registering any protocol with it. So let's go ahead, I'm just going to do a bit of a cheat here. I'm going to go ahead and put a REST client on my main form, and I'm going to do a build, and don't need to let that complete, but okay. And then if I switch back, we can see here we've got the IP pair client. So this is actually the IP client that we need. So I'm going to go ahead and put this into our standard implementation as well. And then if I come back to the form main and I remove the REST client, and let's remove the units that were added for it. So the IP pair client, I'll leave the bind components for now. Then this hopefully should fix the problem. So let's go ahead and give that a run. And I have an access violation, which if I bring this over, okay, so I have an access violation on adding objects here, and I wonder why that's happening. Let's try that again. Okay. So that gets us 3 items. And if I go ahead and hit run, then we should be able to see our application. And there we go, North Austin, South Austin, East Austin coming out of the database. Okay, so let's go ahead and finish up there. Next time we'll take a look at adding some error handling to this function, and then in subsequent videos we'll add some of the other methods to our CRUD class. So, my name's Craig Chapman, and until next time, thanks for watching.